Today, governments are excited about the power of AI. But what about the risk?
Do you want an algorithm determining your guilt or innocence? It may be already.
Then, is the venture community working to invite more women in?
Some data is positive, but it's far from solved.
And as medical professionals struggle to control the coronavirus, are robots the answer?
I'm Alexis Scordato, and this is Future Forward.
I am Stephen Rosenbaum. Let us launch. Hey, Alexa.
Hey, Steve.
So it's a light show today.
I was just about to say.
So let's just start right at the top. We've got our friends from IEEE coming in for the third segment, but I want to begin with AI because what made this story for me so compelling. A couple weeks back, we did a big event at the NYC Media Lab about AI and local news, and one of the developers said kind of casually, well, we build it and then we ask it a question and it's a black box and sometimes the answers aren't what we expect. And that kind of haunted me. Like, what do you mean it's a black box? But I get it. And then the New York Times wrote this piece particularly about crime fighting and AI. And I mean, maybe you're better read than I am, but I just did not know that the use of AI was that prevalent in the way justice was being managed.
Yeah, it is a theme for the show where we talk about algorithms taking over and to what extent there's bias and the application of them. I think that the thing that was tough for me to read is just how personal the story was written. I mean, it talks about someone on probation who isn't even aware that his status as sort of being high risk is determined by an algorithm.
Right.
Right.
And I had it for a moment, for a second, I had this optimistic view, which is, if a judge is making a judgment or a parole officer is making a judgment about someone based on the clothes they wear or the color of their skin or the way that they hold themselves, then you could argue that maybe an algorithm is more colorblind.
Right. Yeah, and one would hope that that's the actual intention behind all of this. Potentially a more efficient, fair, and unbiased system, but there's no way to guarantee that because people who are actually making or programming the algorithm are biased themselves.
All right, so let's start by giving credit. This is a New York Times piece. We'll put the link in the show notes. And the headline is An Algorithm That Grants Freedom or Takes It Away. And it's the story of one parolee whose status was determined by an algorithm and then changed by an algorithm. And he didn't even know it. He couldn't understand why his parole officers were being so kind of not engaging him and not answering the questions of why has my status changed, when in fact what he found out when the New York Times reached out to him
Right.
was that the parole officer hadn't made the change. It had been made algorithmically. Um, this is not a new thing.
No, the article cites other cities where algorithms are applied, like across Berlin or London, etc.
Or New York. I mean, for as long as I can remember, when I used to cover NYPD stories, CompStat was the weekly meeting where they looked at the data and decided, we're going to put, more officers in this neighborhood because we're seeing a trend. We're seeing, there. I guess what I find troubling about this issue and what's kind of eating at me as I think about it is, one of the points the Times makes is when you stand before a judge and all the evidence is presented and the judge says, you're going to get X years in prison, and the judge is something of a black box as well. I mean, he's looking at your criminal record and your behavior in the court and how you answered questions. I mean, he or she is making a judgment based on a series of factors that are not public.
Right.
And some judges are harder on crime than others. Some judges are pro-cop. Some judges are anti. So, there's that whole thing about, did you get a judge that is kind of essentially be biased in your favor.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because if you think about the sequencing of making the algorithm, it has to be predicated on inputs, right? Like a developer is going to basically get a spec that says program something that does X, Y, Z. A good programmer is going to say, okay, well, what are the inputs? How should they be weighted? What are some dummy data sets that we can use to test the algorithm? But I feel like the entire process is so it's just like it's not well understood. And then how do you actually challenge that, right? Like how do you test the validity of whether the algorithm is good or bad, especially in cases when it's people's lives
Okay.
on the line.
And whoever the developers are that are writing the code are sitting in some windowless office building somewhere, then it's being put into a system, then it's being deployed to a human, but there's no how do you have a feedback mechanism to the algorithm to say, or the developers, hey, listen, this person who really was doing well on probation was about to be re-entered into society. You know, something triggered your algorithm to send them back to prison. Like,
Hmm.
how would the developers ever know to fix that when they're so far away from the problem?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to my partner Matt about this earlier today because he works in advertising, and so we were talking about the merits of algorithms and how like where is there a moment or a step in the process where you build in compassion or you build in basically outliers. Like, I'll use a different example, not crime, but like if a woman, say, is pregnant and she's doing all of these things on the internet, clicking on ads, shopping like strollers and things, but then all of a sudden has a miscarriage, right? There's no way for her to actually inform an algorithm that she no longer maps the profile of a pregnant person,
Mm,
and yet there's an algorithm that's saying keep displaying all of this content,
very painful.
right? And so it's like there's so many examples where algorithms are trained and there are behaviors that match certain profiles, but there are times where I think people just all of a sudden break off from the algorithm's profile. And so in the case of criminals, right? How does someone's humanity, redemption, compassion, like forgiveness, I don't know, how does that even factor into a conversation about this technology?
Yeah. So I thought a lot about the issue of prison, offering people a second chance and they go in and then they come out, you know, how would an algorithm know? Would your past criminal record, all the things, all the all the minor crimes you did, all the court dates you missed, all the whatever that you had, that how would that ever calculate into? I came out, I sat in front of the parole board, I, pick whatever, I found religion, I've been redeemed, I've been, I'm ready to actually go back into society and be a productive member of society. How would that ever factor as a data piece?
Right. And then you think about all of these things like say you missed parole or you showed up late. It's like I just think about New York, right? Getting to say Rikers Island and all of the times when subways, weather, or life
Yep.
just gets in the way. It's like there's an entire system that's potentially stacked against you, and there's nothing in an algorithm that's even taking into account sort of the all of these variables.
So, so I think I think this is really hard, and it's not like a person who sits behind a desk and hears 100 sob stories a day about my mother's sick, the dog ate my paper, I missed the subway, my kid was sick, I couldn't get, I mean, at some point there's a certain amount of exhaustion to all of the, get out of jail free card excuses people make. But
Hmm.
but you'd like to think that part of that job is you get to look somebody in the eye and go, okay, I'm going to go to bat for you. You know what?
Right.
I'm not going to mark on your record that you were late, but don't do it again. And then there's that pregnant pause where you connect with somebody on a human level, not a data level, and you say, "Hey, I'm here to fight for you, but don't let me down again, okay?"
Right.
And like as opposed to, the machine says, "I got to send you back to prison," you're going back to prison.
Yeah.
Um,
It's totally like a different episode, but like a thing I think about is like if we look at the developers who are basically working at the intersection of, say, government and civil rights, it's like, who are these people? And, they might have great intentions, but like all of the re- supposedly all of the great developers are working at Google and Facebook and Microsoft because they're making, $300,000 plus salaries. How do we actually get better talent to actually fix these systemic issues?
yeah, I mean, let's put a pin in the question. Maybe there are places that AI shouldn't go.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll move on to a different story because I think we are not going to solve the problems of AI today. And I learned some, by the way, I'll share with you over the next couple of weeks. I learned some fascinating things at the AI conference that I and Justin led at the Media Lab. Very interesting, and talked, and we'll have some videos which we'll be able to show, and I'll have links, but not quite yet. All right, so let's move on to venture. So at first I thought this was just going to be a good news story. Like I know this issue matters to you. It obviously matters to everyone that's in technology. There are more and more women that are being brought in to venture firms. Uh, why don't we just have a little piece of cake and celebrate and move on? Why is this not just, first of all, let's do the good news first, and then we'll do the comma but part after. How's that? Um,
Sure. Uh, so there were more women who were named partners at venture firms in 2019 than ever before in history, which is great. It was 52 women became VC partners or general partners for the first time, which is and that's in comparison to 71 men. So that gap is actually
Now, looking at the picture that the New York Times or Medium actually put up, um, there is the little matter of the fact that they all, almost without exception, appear to be white.
hmm
But I guess you can't do gender and race. Maybe you have to solve these problems sequentially. I don't know. I mean,
intersectionality is really hard, but there was one black woman named partner and no Latino women.
so let me ask the hard question. I mean, did you look at the credentials of, does this cohort of women strike you as, I'm just going to be, I can't find a subtle way to ask this question. Are these people that were ready for this role and earned it and were being held back? Or do you think these are, what's a nicer word than token? Okay, we need a bunch of more women. Okay, you're in the office. Okay, go. Like, I wasn't sure from looking at the credentials.
You know, my brain doesn't even go there. I always assume default yes, because if you are a minority and underrepresented in any sector and you reach a position of privilege and you make it to the top, just getting there, just being considered and then getting the yes is such a testament to someone's grit and sort of resilience. And so I just by default say yes, every single person should be there. It's not a token hire, it's not affirmative action. If you can hang in your profession and your career and you can be considered equal to the individuals at the top and challenge the status quo, yes, you belong.
I'm just letting that hang for a minute because it was so well said, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to reiterate it. I think I'm glad to hear that, and that's a good way to draw a line under that. So now let's get to the but not so good part. Why is 52 women as VC partners not just like an absolute up and to the right home run? Moving on, things are getting better.
I mean, we'll celebrate it for what it is, but 65% of venture firms still have zero female partners. And so, again, whether it is coding or investment, if we think that tech is biased and we think that tech should serve all, then the constituents who influence the tech, whether it's from the development side or the investment side, we need diversity. We need that. We need individuals who are actually going to
All right, I'm
influence.
going to play act the board meeting of the firm where there is no women, and then you tell me what I get wrong. Well, we're getting some heat for not having at least one female venture partner. We got Sally. I mean, she's been here 6 weeks and she's pretty good, and that way we'd stop getting the heat. Why don't we just promote her on up and call it a day? Now, other random white VC responds, well, you know what's going to happen next. People are going to want to start measuring whether or not she got any deals done, and what percentage of our portfolio has it. And we really, we're a, given our focus on the category that we've chosen, which is all we think male focused, whatever it may be that they think is male focused. We're having a woman on, as a partner is going to create an expectation. We're investing in things like fashion or food or baby products, and we're not interested in that. Was that a good impersonation?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'll go work backwards. I mean, uh, food, fashion, etc. These are like billion-dollar categories. Like wellness as a whole is
Oh
a
no, wait, no,
trillion
no,
dollar.
no. It was meant to be even more objectionable than that, which is how dare they think that women have some internal bias that they can. There are only certain categories that they can be expert in. It was meant to piss you off even more than
Oh my gosh, I think I'm
that.
so used to actually just trying to break apart every single line item. I mean, I'm like scanning the article, but I mean, the companies where women have leadership, they exit a year faster than all male teams. Like there are stats that show outcomes that, women, the presence of women actually does produce better outcomes. It's just interesting to me that in the way that there's so much like default skepticism around women, there's such default trust around institutions like Bain, Harvard, Stanford, and like traditional credentials. And it's a double standard. And for all of these VCs who sort of put their money on moonshots, it's like, why are you like, how is it possible that you can feel so heavily invested in the concept of consumer space travel, but you can't for a moment believe that like 50% of the human population should somehow have representation in decision making? I
Yeah,
don't know.
I, I,
Like it's so close to me, and I like it's hard for it's like it's actually just hard because I really do want to take in different perspectives, but every single time I've like talked to people about um, women and leadership positions, whether like VC, entrepreneurship, management, technology, all of the assumptions like just expose um, just like traditional institutions of patriarchy.
all right. So we only have 2 minutes left. I want you to speak to somewhere in our massive podcast audience. There is sitting a VC in a firm that has currently got no women partners. So I want you to speak directly to him and say, here's what you got to do. Like, what's the message we're giving to what are men that have all male partnerships in this current world? What are they missing, and what do they have to do to fix it?
One, they should all take unconscious bias training and recognize their bias and own up to it. Second is it's not enough to just hire one woman. They need to work extra hard because one woman isn't going to make a difference. You actually need the presence of probably at least 30% female composition in order for the presence of women to impact outcomes. And then the third is that we can't afford to wait because there's a huge, huge, huge opportunity to actually transform industries where that female or that woman's perspective is going to make all the difference. And so if you care about money, then you should care about women because they go hand in hand.
You just hit the ball out of the park. That's great. All right. Well, you know,
And on a sadder note, I guess we're gonna switch gears to talk about the coronavirus.
yeah. We are in fact going to talk. We're going to bring in our friend Glenn and talk about the coronavirus. So next up, there's all kinds of things we could be talking about in terms of the coronavirus and its impact on technology companies and on workflow and closing offices in China. But for the purposes of today, we wanted to kind of focus on a place where we thought we actually might be able to teach our listeners and viewers something they didn't know, and that is about specifically what's going on with medical robots and the coronavirus. So with that, we bring on our friend Glenn, who is the keeper of all things robotic. And Glenn, I guess maybe I'll start with an obvious question. Is the stories that we're reading about robots treating potential coronavirus infectees new technology, or is it just medical robots now part of a public news story?
Well, it's the answer is yes and no, and I'm not being coy. It's that the robots are coming into play here in quite a few different roles. I mean, I've just from my reading, I've realized there's 4 or 5, maybe half a dozen roles. They range from remote diagnostics, in other words, almost like a remote exam being done by a medical robot that's equipped with video and audio and even a stethoscope. So there's a few hospitals doing that. And then there are hospitals doing things like using robots to deliver food to people quarantined to a hotel. So there are planes that landed and there was someone on the flight identified, and they put all these people in a makeshift quarantine hotel, and they're using robots to deliver food because I guess the hotel was equipped for this anyway. So, and there's even other examples of robots being used in this and to help out with the coronavirus.
So does that? But I think delivery robots don't surprise me. I mean, I read it and I thought it was interesting, but there's actually kind of some new innovation going on, around infectious diseases, and the robot's actually doing more than that. Tell us a little about that.
Well, one application. Well, here's an application that struck me as kind of interesting. Is there's a hospital, I believe it's in Guangzhou. I think it's the Guangzhou Provincial People's Hospital, which is using 2 robots now, and apparently has a third on delivery, to deliver drugs to coronavirus patients. So, in other words, this was clearly work that was going on before the coronavirus, because these robots are integrated into the hospital, so that the robots are able to operate the elevator, for example. So they have some sort of interface between the robot and the elevator, so they can actually travel. Presumably, all you need to do is put the drug in and program which room it's supposed to go to, and the robot takes the drug to the room, navigating the elevators and the hallways and all this sort of stuff. So that's kind of interesting, and it's not a super high-tech application, but certainly that requires some pretty well-engineered robotics to do very reliably. So you're seeing some of that. Apparently there's a hospital in Seattle that way back with the Ebola crisis came up with a partially roboticized isolation room where a patient is in this room and nurses, well-protected nurses, go into this room, and they can arrange this robot so that doctors can see the patient, communicate with the patient, hear the patient, and even take stethoscope readings through this robot. So you have well-protected nurses, 1 or more, in the room with the patient, arranging the robot properly, and then doctors on the other side, interacting with the patient through this robot. So there's some of that is also happening. And there's other applications. There's robots now being used in germicidal applications. Robots equipped with what's called far ultraviolet C radiation, which can kill a wide spectrum of bacteria, flu virus, and I think even fungus. So you're starting to see some of that. So I mean, these are pretty exciting technological developments, really. They're going to make us all safer. But there's also, like with any technology, I think you have to say that there's probably going to be a cost here. And not just financial cost.
Well, I'm, knock on wood, have never been a patient in a hospital, but I presume that even in their most busy, automated, kind of slightly distant self, having a nurse come in and speak to you and, take your blood pressure or give you medication, that human contact is pretty important.
Right. Exactly.
And there was somebody on the news the other day was talking about the fact that they'd been in isolation in China for 2 weeks and had not seen another person. And
Right.
I think if the person who was if the entity that was coming to take your temperature or give you medication was a machine, that might be pretty soul sucking.
Yeah. Well, it's also it's going to be scary for the patient, and it's also, I mean, there's a real chance that, I mean, these patients are probably talking to their loved ones on smartphones and things. So and useful.
Alexa, do you want to be treated by a robot?
I'm open. I think not in the near future, but I would be open to the possibility.
I this is why I love doing this podcast with her, because like everything that I think she's gonna push back on, she's like, "No, I'm good with that." Like, see, I got it totally wrong. All right, so we have just like 2 minutes left. Let's just talk for a second about the impact on technology broadly. We live in an interconnected world, right? So, the thing that seems the most likely to be impacted by the shutdown of borders and transportation and people is technology. I mean, I think we're already seeing that, aren't we? I think Google,
Well,
a number of big companies have shut down travel to China, for example.
right. Well, China, along with Korea, Japan, the United States, these are the leading countries in the world for technology development and application. So, when a country like China experiences a devastating outbreak in one of its key cities, you're going to see uh, an initial chilling effect on technology development, as we've seen, has been noted. But as we've just been discussing, you're probably also going to see some interesting later term developments in terms of technology that's going to come out for remote monitoring, diagnostics, and so forth. One of the interesting things I think that we're seeing here is that hospitals now, a couple of interesting things are coming together, which we're already seeing in this response to coronavirus. One is 5G hospitals. So 5G is now starting to proliferate, and there are hospitals that have seen promise in 5G because the very high data rates that 5G makes possible with these networks enable robots that can telepresence robots that can be very capable. We mentioned earlier in the show about these robots that are, have diagnostic capabilities. People are already talking about robots that can do teleoperated surgery. So 5G, the tremendously high data rates of 5G, are going to make possible robots that can treat patients, even perform minor surgery in the near future. Now, that's not necessarily going to help with a virus outbreak, but these 5G hospitals are, I think in some cases, they're already seeing that they're useful for this kind of robotic application. And the second thing was the thing I alluded to earlier, which are this use of far ultraviolet C to kill pathogens, to kill bacteria, viruses, I think even funguses. So that's kind of state of the art. That's starting to happen. Telepresence robots operating in ultra fast 5G networks, that's starting to happen. And we're even already seeing this. These are very new technologies, and we're seeing them deployed in this coronavirus outbreak.
Okay, so listeners, when you're thinking about checking into a hospital, you should ask a series of questions about, do they take your insurance? Is your doctor practicing there? And by the way, do you have 5G?
Right.
Glenn, thank you very much. Very interesting. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. So I actually thought that Glenn's perspective was kind of strangely optimistic. Like, we're going to move around a lot. We're going to be on airplanes. Other diseases are going to spread, and we're going to have increasingly better trained 5G connected medical robots to cure us.
Yeah, I can buy into that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Good. So kudos to Glenn for being able to take a bad story and turn it into a good ending of our podcast for this week.
You can always count on Glenn.
Indeed. We are out of time. Alexa, have an excellent week. We'll be back again next week for Future Forward. Till then, stay future facing. We are out.